Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be continuing our learning about economics and the concepts of supply and demand, but we're going to be looking at them in a real world situation. And we're going to be using them to help us understand decisions that governments might make. So, to recap, a free market is the words that we use to describe any basically country, any economic area where supply and demand are the only forces that affect what businesses do. Okay, in essence, in a truly free market, there would be no government rules or regulations about what businesses do. Okay, that's pretty unrealistic. There are no true free markets, but there are definitely ones in the world that are more free than others. Okay, the reason we like free markets in economics is because it allows everything to happen naturally, everything that we've been learning about with supply and demand. Okay. Customers are going to have complete control with what they buy and what they demand. Okay. And businesses are going to focus all of their resources on making sure to make products that customers actually want. It also fuels innovation. That competition that businesses have for each other, that drives them to make things faster and better. Okay. However, the reason why a truly free market can be bad in some situations is that there is no consideration for anything other than money and profit. Okay. So there's no consideration if a product is bad for people, if a product is bad for the environment. None of that gets considered in a free market. And so that's why we tend to need some government intervention is what we're going to be talking about here. So we're based in Canada. In Canada, we have a mostly free market. But the government will step in when there might be harm to individuals or to society or to the environment, and put restrictions or regulations in. And those restrictions and regulations, the options that they have, are what we're going to look at today. So we're taking these concepts of economics and we're applying them to what people might do with them. Okay, so if you were to follow a career in economics, you could end up being an economic advisor for the government and making suggestions like these. Okay, so in order to do this, I'm going to show you a little bit of an example. Okay, so in the 1970s, this product called asbestos was extremely popular. And I know the 1970s sound like a long time ago, but it was only 50 years ago. So in the history of society, it really wasn't that long ago. In case you're not aware, asbestos is basically a fibrous material. It's different. So like we used to use cotton to make thread and string, okay, to be able to make material. We now use a lot of polyester. Asbestos was a man-made product like that. The reason it grew so largely in popularity is that it was really, really cheap, yet really, really strong, and most importantly, it was fireproof. Okay, and that was the biggest thing. So again, in a free market, somebody is trying to innovate products. They're trying to make things better. They're trying to make them cheaper so they can make more profit off of them. And they're trying to make them something that customers are going to desire. And somebody made asbestos. And they realized that customers really, really wanted it. So we started seeing it involved in everything. Most commonly, we know of asbestos being heavily used in insulation, which is what is put inside walls to help keep the heat and the cool in. Also pictured here, there are strings, literally lots of clothes were made out of asbestos. The one on the right here were these called stove mats. So you would just put them over your stove because they were fireproof so that you would be able to put out a fire with them. All right. Everybody was making products with it. We loved it. But here's the thing. Okay, asbestos is a lot older than from the 1970s when it was really popular. Okay, early in the 1900s, when it started being used more prominently, studies actually had already found that asbestos was extremely bad for people's health. Okay, they continued those studies in the 1900s, and they saw that continued exposure to asbestos, the people that were working at the manufacturing factories, the people that were installing it, were leading to huge numbers of early death and lung problems, okay, especially in the towns where they mined the asbestos, okay. In the late 1970s, there was actually a court case where people were suing the manufacturing facilities and the mines because so many people were dying and getting sick from the asbestos. In those court documents, they were actually able to show that the companies themselves knew of the negative health benefits as early as the 1930s. And not only did they not stop using it, but they actually hid them from the public so that the public wouldn't know about it. Okay, so by the time the 1970s have rolled around and asbestos is in everything, we're saying that we've known that it's been bad for 70 years, at least some scientists have, and that as long as 50 years, the actual companies themselves have known that it's bad for people, and yet it continued to be used. Okay, in court cases, this is public knowledge. Everyone at this point in the 70s could know that this was bad for them, and yet businesses continued to use asbestos in their products. Okay, there was a lot of public outcry. And so in the 1980s, almost all manufacturers stopped using the asbestos, but only once people started getting really, really mad about it or started boycotting the product. Okay, and here's the really interesting part is that it wasn't until 2016 that Canada actually made it illegal for asbestos to be used in building products. And then it wasn't until 2018 that it actually became illegal in the whole country. Okay, 2018. That was 7 years ago. Okay, and yet we've known that it's bad for people for a really, really long time. All right, so let's look at why. Okay, so first of all, if the government knows that a product is bad for people or bad for the environment, they do have the option to make it illegal. And that's what we saw happen with the asbestos. Okay, the government will completely ban the use of the substance and make it for sale in the country. Okay, we have seen that in Canada with a number of products. This here is a baby walker. You might be familiar with them, and you may have even had one as a child because they do still exist in Canada when people go to the United States to buy them and bring them back to Canada. Okay, not the ones where the kids just bounce around in them, but that they actually have wheels on the bottom and can walk around in them. That's illegal in Canada. Why? Because young infants that were moving around in them, unfortunately, we're falling down staircases in them, and it was causing a lot of infant deaths, and so Canada made them illegal. It's not illegal in every country, as I mentioned. You can still buy them in the United States, but they are illegal in Canada. Okay. Also in Canada, we have a number of pesticides. These are chemicals that are used on crops and growing and weed control for grass that are now illegal due to the big influence that they have both on the environment and then also getting into the water supply that people are consuming. Okay, and we also have all of our plastics in Canada. It's illegal for them to use a substance called BPA, and so all plastics need to be BPA free. You might see labels like this on it because in not all countries is it actually illegal, and so businesses will take the time to advertise it. Okay, so there's lots of products and things that, businesses came up with, they invented in the free market, they started selling, and then the government eventually had to step in and say, nope, that's not good for our society, that's not good for people, and made them illegal. Okay, also not pictured here would be most weapons, especially automatic weapons in Canada, are illegal, but again, are not in other countries, and so they definitely still exist. Okay. When we look back to our asbestos case, we might be saying, why did it take till 2018 for this to become illegal if we knew that it was bad? Okay. That's because it takes a really long time for the government to make something completely illegal. Okay. If you take a politics or a law class, you're going to learn what that process looks like. That's not within our curriculum. But they need a lot of proof of consistent harm because what they're doing in essence is they're taking away business from a number of businesses. Okay, so while yes, we want the government to do things that help society be better and help businesses not harm people, they need a lot of proof. They need concrete evidence, and that takes time to collect. Okay, and then once they've collected it, it takes time for these laws to be passed. Also, these laws being passed are bad for businesses. They will result in businesses making less profit and making less money, okay? And businesses don't like that. So there's going to be a good amount of pushback or resistance to make this happen. And that's why it takes so long, okay? And because of that length of time, the government actually often will look at other options. So if there's something that they're seeing is starting to have negative health benefits or negative society benefits that they want to reduce people from using, okay, they may look at other options to help reduce it as they're in the very long process and to make something illegal. Okay, so what are these other options? Well, before I tell them to you, let's think logically. Okay, what is a business's motivation? Okay, a for-profit business's entire motivation, according to economics, is profit. Okay, they are entirely motivated by profit. Okay, what they make, how they make it entirely comes from how much money that they can make off of it. All right, profit is calculated by how much money we take into the business in revenue minus how much goes out of the business in expenses. Okay, so if we want to increase the overall profit, we have two different ways to do that. One, we can increase the amount of money coming into the business. And as long as we don't reduce, or as long as we don't increase those expenses, that's going to create a bigger profit for us. Or we can reduce the expenses, which also is going to create that difference between it. Okay, so those are the two ways that businesses are going to try to do this. Okay, so if we want to stop businesses from using certain materials like asbestos, instead of making it illegal, we could also do something that's going to make it more expensive. Okay, I mentioned that a lot of products had it in it because it was the cheapest option. Businesses chose it specifically because it gave them profit when they made their products. Okay, the expenses went down. So if we could make asbestos more expensive, then businesses can't make a profit by using it and they'll look for a different product that's available. So in order to make both businesses and consumers not want the product, we need to make the price go up. Because remember, when price goes up, demand goes down, and we don't want people or businesses using these dangerous products. Okay? And the way that we're going to do it is we're going to use taxes. Okay. Again, in a free market, the government cannot tell a business what they need to charge for their products. That's going to be naturally determined by our equilibrium point. But what the government can do is they can put a tax on something. So when they put a tax on something, the business still picks the price, but then the tax increases the price above that. Okay, we in Canada and in Ontario have a price on everything that we buy, or a tax on everything that we buy. That's called our HST, and it's 13%. It's on pretty much everything that we buy. Okay, that's an overarching tax. That's just a way for the government to make money. What we are talking about is a specific tax, and we call that an exercise tax. This is a tax that is only on a single product, and it is specifically on that product with the plan to increase the price of that product. The government is very straightforward about why they're putting it on it. They're putting it on it to increase the price because if they increase the price, they will decrease demand. We know that to be true by the law of demand. And if we decrease demand, then that means less people are using it because it is harmful to society, it might be unhealthy, and we want to discourage people from using it. If the price is higher, less people will buy it. They will be naturally discouraged from using it. Okay, a great example in Canada that used exercise taxes to discourage the use of was cigarettes. Okay, cigarettes used to be very, very common, very, very widely accepted. The studies started coming in showing the health detriment from it. A number of people just took that warning and stopped using it, but they're also very addictive. So a lot of people were still using it. It was still very ingrained in society. And so the government, knowing the health detriment that was to it, started adding taxes to it. Okay, this made cigarettes more expensive. So people that already maybe wanted to quit, but they were addicted to it, now their wallets were being affected, and that was going to also influence their use of it. Okay, another country, South Korea, actually very quickly, almost completely eliminated the use of cigarettes by using exercise taxes, by going very aggressively in on the taxes to be able to do it. So they're a really good case study to consider as well. Okay. In Canada, they also do this on alcohol. Alcohol has its own specific taxation. The government hasn't said that they're trying to completely get rid of it, but they're definitely trying to decrease the use of it by having taxes on that. And we also know that in Canada, it's a big debate in the upcoming elections that we have an exercise tax on gasoline and carbon in general. The government is trying to reduce carbon emissions because they are bad for the environment. And so they have specifically put an extra tax on things that create carbon, like burning gases. The thought process is that if gas keeps getting more and more expensive, people are not going to be able to afford it, not want to afford it, and so the demand for it will go down. They will choose other options that are less expensive, maybe public transit, maybe buying electric vehicles, and doing something else. So that is the reason that those prices are going up with the taxes that are there. Okay, if we look specifically at our why, using our supply and demand to explain this, okay, we know that the government has increased the price. Okay, so the initial action is not actually a change in demand or supply. The government itself has put a tax on it, which has caused the price to increase. Okay, we know that when the price has increased, okay, the amount of a product that's going to be bought is going to be determined by the demand line. Okay, and you can see here that at this new price, the point where the price crosses the demand line is here, which means the quantity that is going to be wanted and sold is going to be much lower than where it naturally was at that equilibrium point. Okay. The thing to consider here, okay, obviously we could see that the suppliers wanted to supply more at this price, but if customers don't want it, then it's not gonna happen. Okay. The thing that economists have to take into account and the government has to take into account is if the product is a need. If society needs this for survival, then they're just going to continue to buy it. Okay. And we would see that demand is not going to decrease all that much, but everybody is going to be paying more for it. Okay. And this is the argument that some of the political parties have around the carbon tax on our gas, is because they're saying that gas is basically a need. And so everybody is just paying more for it and getting frustrated and not having money for other things. Okay, the other problem that can come out of exercise taxes is that businesses might still just continue to do it. Okay, they might be willing to reduce their prices, and so that the overall price ends up being the exact same. Okay, that is true. However, you do have to remember that if the business reduces their price, then they're likely making less profit, and so there are going to be less businesses that are going to be willing to do it. Okay, however, we have sometimes seen this backfire in that the business then tries to use cheaper products to still be able to make their product, and then the product is actually even less healthy, okay, which is something that we did see happening with cigarettes. They used to be almost completely tobacco, which is bad for you, but then when the taxes came on, they wanted to produce them cheaper, and so they started adding fillers and other items that are even worse for people's health when they smoke them. Okay, so just talking about the flip side and making sure that we understand it. Okay, so they can make a product completely illegal, but that takes a long time. They can put a tax on it, which is going to increase the price and reduce the demand. Okay. Or, okay, our third option is coming out of this belief system here, which is that actually rewarding good behavior is more powerful than punishing bad behavior. So instead of making the thing we don't want society to do more expensive, okay, instead, psychologists believe that if we make the good behavior, if we reward people for doing the good behavior, then they're more likely to do it. Okay, and that's what number 3 is looking at. Number 3 is when the government is going to preemptively give money to the good option, that is the alternative to the thing that they don't want people to do. And we call this a subsidy. Okay, so a subsidy is a sum of money, a chunk of money that the government gives to a business or businesses in a certain industry, okay, and they don't have to pay it back. Okay, they give it to them with the thought process that if that business gets more money, okay, then the government is basically paying a chunk of that fee for citizens. And so those businesses can make those items cheaper, okay, and therefore more people are going to buy them. Okay. Again, we know that the law of supply and demand tells us that if things are cheaper, demand goes up, people want them. Okay. And so again, the government is trying to influence behavior by saying, okay, I don't want you to do this. So instead, I'm going to make the thing I want you to do cheaper. And then we naturally would move to that product. Okay, so we were just talking about how the government doesn't want us to be driving gas-powered vehicles and to creating carbon. And one option they had was to make gas more expensive. The other option they had was to use a subsidy on the alternative being electric vehicles. Okay, and so they created these subsidies. They gave huge amounts of money to the businesses that were making electric vehicles to bring the price of them down. And they also were giving subsidies to those businesses every time they sold them. So it used to be that if you went out and bought an electric vehicle, the government would pay up to $5,000 of that vehicle's cost for you to bring down the price of that. Okay. They also did it, it's kind of hidden behind my image there, with light bulbs and things that are energy efficient for households. Okay. They made the better option cheaper so that people are more willing to do it. Okay. In Ontario, we've seen this happen the last few years with childcare and daycare. Okay. The government came out, they're calling it the $10 daycare. It's not actually $10 daycare, but yes, they are subsidizing it. So my children are currently in daycare. The cost that I pay has gone down. Okay. And that's not the daycare itself. The daycare itself is still charging the same amount and making the same amount of profit. It's just that the government is using government money to pay for a chunk of my children's daycare fees. Why? Well, the thing that they want is they want adults working. Okay. And so if they can make daycare less expensive, more people will put their kids in daycare. And then that second adult in those families that was home taking care of the child will go back to work. It is getting the behavior that the government wants. Okay. We also in Canada and Ontario specifically have huge subsidies for fresh produce. Okay. Land is very expensive. Okay. People want houses, and so developers are willing to pay a lot of money to buy land, and farmers are not making a lot of money by using that land to grow crops. And so we were seeing lots and lots of farms selling in order to build houses. The government went, wait a minute, we still need food. And so instead of them choosing to sell their land, they're giving these farms big subsidies, big amounts of money in order to continue to make this food. This is going to keep them in business. This is going to keep profit. It's also going to help reduce food prices so that citizens are buying fresh produce and healthier items. So when the government announces a subsidy, okay, it is to all of the businesses that make that product. They don't give it to just one business. So for example, with the childcare one, they said, okay, all of the childcare providers are going to be getting this money. Okay. Or they said everybody that grows corn is going to be getting this money, or everybody that makes electric vehicles. Okay, so as you can imagine, if beforehand we are in the free market, our business is willing to make a certain amount of this product. That's what our supply line is at the price, and that results in the quantity. Now the government is saying, here's this huge amount of money to continue doing exactly what you're doing. And what that's likely going to result in is that me as a business, I'm going to be able to use that money to make more product. Okay. The other thing is that other businesses that might be doing other things are like, hey, now I want to do that business because there's all this money available to us. Okay. So this is going to result in our supply increasing. The price has not changed, but the supply is going to increase. And if you remember, when the supply increases, that's going to be a shift to the right for our supply line. Okay. And then natural free market is going to take over. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have our new equilibrium. Okay. And if we look at that new equilibrium is going to result in a decrease in the price of the product and an increase in the quantity of the product that's available to people. Okay. So by the government giving the businesses the money, then the natural free market is going to take over, and we're going to see that price go down and that quantity available go up. We know that as the price goes down, demand goes up, which is why that quantity sold is going to go up as well. And so that's how the government's going to influence this behavior. They're going to get more people to buy it and more businesses to make it. And if more people are consuming it, then they're less likely to be consuming the bad product. All right. As always, we need to consider the downside, and the big one for this is who pays for it. Okay. If the money is coming from the government, then who is the money actually coming from? Everybody in society. Okay. This is where our taxes are going. Okay, so even though it seems like it's cheaper for us and more people are willing to buy it because it's cheaper for us, we are in essence still paying for it. Okay, and or that money is coming from something else. So instead of the government giving money to healthcare, they're giving it to farmers. Okay, instead of them giving it to military, they're giving it to farmers. Okay, the money does have to come from somewhere. Okay, and then the other thing is, can suppliers keep up? Okay, so if the prices come way down, then more and more people are going to be demanding it. And it often takes time for businesses to scale up their production and make new production facilities and different things like that. And so those are some considerations to take into account. All right, so we have learned about 3 of the ways that the government can intervene in a free market if we are concerned about a health benefit or an environmental benefit that we want to influence. And again, practice is the best way to get our hands around it and our head around it. So go ahead and do that practice now, and we'll see you in the next video.